And today is the last and the final day of the two-day G20 Summit. Yesterday, a lot of key decisions were made at the summit. In a nutshell, the G20 leaders saw a very successful day one. The important decisions taken on the first day of the summit, it included adoption of the New Delhi Leadership Declaration announcement and also announcement of a mega India-West Asia-Europe economic corridor and also the induction of the African Union as a permanent member of the Group of 20. But what will be on the agenda for today's meet? We will tell you that in the course of the next few minutes. Well, in the early hours, like we just saw, between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock local time, we saw how the leaders and the heads of delegations, they arrived at Rajghat and they will now pay their respect to Mahatma Gandhi. Meanwhile, at the venue, they will also sign on the peace wall inside the leaders' lounge. Moreover, there will be a live performance of Mahatma Gandhi's favorite devotional songs. Now, after visiting Rajghat, all the leaders and heads of delegations will depart for Bharat Mandapam. Well, that is the venue of this year's G20 Summit. And these are the live visuals that we are getting from Rajghat, where the G20 leaders are arriving. As we can see, the Australian Prime Minister, or Anthony Albanese, is entering the Rajghat there. He will be paying respect to Mahatma Gandhi's Samadhi out there. The leaders will also lay a wreath at Mahatma Gandhi's Samadhi. These are the live visuals coming from Rajghat, where the G20 leaders will pay respect to Mahatma Gandhi Samadhi, and this is Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who has just been greeted by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi with rather a khadi shawl, as we can see. Meanwhile, the Indian Prime Minister is also giving an analysis of the background of the Rajghat there. Well, there are a lot of things that are lined up on day two of the G20 Summit. After paying their respects, live visuals coming in, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as well entering the Rajghat along with his delegation. This is the first event, this is the first thing that the G20 leaders will be doing. They will be paying respect to Mahatma Gandhi, and at the venue they will also sign on the peace wall inside the leaders' lounge. These are the live visuals coming in from India's national capital, New Delhi, the Rajghat, and that is the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Well, he has been greeted yet again with the Indian Prime Minister, and there's the khadi shawl that the Indian Prime Minister has welcomed the Canadian Prime Minister with. Well, after paying respects to Mahatma Gandhi at the Rajghat, as we can see, the leaders will also be taking part in a tree planting ceremony at Bharat Mandapam's South Plaza. Well, there will also be a live performance of Mahatma Gandhi's devotional songs. Well, to talk more on the G20 Summit and what all is lined up on day two of the G20 Summit, we have with us our VOA correspondent, Jessica Stone, with us right here in the studio. Very warm welcome to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
Right, now, Jessica, we have been talking about the major projects signed on the first day of the G20 Summit, the Biofuel Alliance and also the infrastructure project. But how is US President Joe Biden's visit to India and the statement in the New Delhi Declaration that does not mention Russia as an aggressor? How is all this being perceived back home in Washington, D.C., especially with elections just around the corner?
Well, there certainly is some criticism of the perceived watering down of this statement. But there's also the case that, the White House really believes very strongly that we needed to have consensus at this G20 and that the necessary paragraphs to condemn territorial integrity being taken by force are, in fact, in the declaration. And so given the current tensions between the U.S. and China in particular, that could be construed not only with respect to what happened in Ukraine and what is going on in Ukraine, but also the tensions between China and Taiwan. So that's an important perspective for the Americans. But yes, some of the headlines coming out are certainly that the only way to get to consensus was to compromise on this language, and there will be definitely aspects of the American population who are going to be unhappy about that. But it's not a huge election issue, kind of an arrangement for Joe Biden, for that matter, for his opponents. So there's unlikely to be a domestic implication of this.
Right, absolutely. Also, Jessica, let's just cut across to the live visuals coming in from Rajghat. That is the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who has reached the Rajghat, and she just walked down the stairs there. She is walking towards the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. The G20 leaders will be paying their respect to Mahatma Gandhi at the Rajghat right now, in just a short while from now.
Agreements that the Americans have announced during this time is also with the Europeans to work on another corridor in Africa, which is somewhat already existing, but this is this common approach between the United States, Europe, and India on establishing these economic corridors that have several purposes. They can achieve sustainable energy travel, they can improve connectivity, and everyone has real concerns about supply chain resilience throughout the world given what happened during the pandemic, and these corridors have the potential to address that as well by literally cutting down travel time of goods and services to people all across the world now.
Absolutely, Jessica. Let's also cut across to Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibal. A very good morning to you, Siddhant. It's a power-packed day too as well. We saw a lot of things on day one of the G20 Summit, and right now we're getting live visuals of the G20 leaders who are entering the Rajghat to pay their respects to Mahatma Gandhi. Take us through a rundown as to what all is lined up on day two of the G20 Summit today.
Well, the summit will shortly start with a session called One Family, but before that, we are right now witnessing the world leaders reaching Rajghat to pay homage to the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, and being welcomed by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and he is giving them a khaki cloth as well, and this is very symbolic in many senses. But talking about the other aspects of the day, there will be several bilaterals, in fact, several press conferences as well. The Russian Foreign Minister is going to hold a press conference. The Comorosian president, who is the African Union chair, is also going to hold a press conference. There's a French presser as well. So a lot of briefings that will be happening, and we of course will be giving you all the live and latest from the ground. But essentially today is a day where India is again going to step out when it comes to the world of diplomacy and tell to the world that how New Delhi's voice matter at a time of great geopolitical flux. There is a lot of euphoria still over that miracle that has happened of the joint statement, something that nobody expected till Saturday morning, I would say. And now we have this joint statement where, of course, the concerns of both the West and Russia have been put in place. And while there is no direct condemnation of Russia in the joint statement, what the West wanted, the reaffirmation of the UN Charter, the territorial integrity of states should be respected. That specific para is also present, and also Turkey's role in terms of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And the Indian Prime Minister's all-famous line that this is not an era of war, and this is the second time that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's line that this is not an era of war has been included in the G20 joint statement. Now this is a line that the Indian Prime Minister told to the Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Samarkand bilateral meeting. So all in all, a packed day.
Right, Siddhant, these are live visuals again as we are on the visuals from Rajghat. That's the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who was just welcomed by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, again with a khadi shawl. The Indian Prime Minister is welcoming all the G20 leaders personally and is also greeting them with the khadi shawl. And is we can see how he's telling them about the surroundings of the Rajghat before the G20 leaders pay respect to Mahatma Gandhi. And also, let's also cut across live to our correspondent Bhairavi Singh, who's again joining us live from Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the G20 Summit. A very good morning to you, Bhairavi. Now, a lot of things are lined up on day two of the G20 Summit, like Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibal pointed out. But Bhairavi, how do you assess India's message of one earth, one family, and one future resonating strongly with all the G20 leaders?
Right, absolutely, Rahesha. The message of one Earth, one family has been taken very well. India's communique, the draft resolution has been accepted. The fact that the world has to come together in times like these, which we are coming out of a COVID pandemic, a long 3 years of the pandemic, and now, of course, we are in the middle of a Russia-Ukraine war that has impacted food, energy security, supply chain resilience. All of these things that were put forth by the Indian government have been recognized by world leaders as important enough to, of course, discuss and come to some sort of consensus on, including other issues like global taxation, the regulation of cryptocurrency. Climate mitigation is a huge point which India wanted to put forth and has been agreed upon by not just countries like America, but also countries like China, which are on board on issues that affect the economy. I want to just step aside, Rahesha, from all the serious talk for a bit and just talk about a little bit of the color today. We know that the spouses of the leaders are, going to be doing a trip, we believe, from Humayun tomb to Qutub Minar. We believe they might even stop by at the National Modern Art Gallery. Yesterday, a lot of them were, in Indian attire, which included, of course, Rishi Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy. There was the IMF chief, who was also in Indian clothes. The World Bank chief, Ajay Banga's wife, was also in a sari, as was Sheikh Hasina. And the food was all vegetarian at yesterday's gala dinner, I beg your pardon. And millet, which India proposes as a superfood, was on the dinner menu as well. So these are all small messaging, ways of messaging by India to promote food that is healthy, that is sustainable. Millet, as you know, is a crop that takes very little water. And so these are small things that the Indian government is doing through its messaging, which is, of course, our theme is Vasudev Kutumbakam, which is one Earth, one family as well. Rahesha.
Absolutely, Bhairavi. Clearly, India's soft power is at display out there. But coming back to you, Jessica, there was a lot of uncertainty on US President Joe Biden's arrival to India. But he finally made it. That also a day before the summit, and he held that big bilateral with the Indian Prime Minister. Talk to us if that bilateral set the agenda for the G20 Summit, and how significant is this?
Well, I think it's important to think about how far the U.S.-India relationship has come up until this moment. I mean, White House officials say that that have been working on these issues for many years say that there's really just been a warming over the recent past, maybe 5 years, that we've gone from distrust to trust, to partnership, to working on global issues with the G20 and with the Indo-Pacific strategy that encompasses all the way from India to Oceania and the Western Pacific for the United States. So, yes, there's a growing partnership. There's certainly a definite common interest on climate and sustainable development, as well as on financing projects in a more transparent and non-coercive way, which is what these two leaders have worked on during the course of the G20.
Absolutely, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us and WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much. Well, coming back to you, Siddhant, talk to us about the slew of bilaterals that are scheduled to take place, not only between the Indian Prime Minister and the other G20 leaders, but also amongst the G20 leaders. And what will dominate the talks today?
Well, so two aspects to it. First, of course, the bilateral the Indian Prime Minister will be having. He has overall 15 bilaterals. Many of them have already happened with countries like Italy, Japan, US, Mauritius, Bangladesh. Today, we will see bilateral meeting with the Turkey President, with Comoros, which is the African Union chair as well. We saw how the Indian Prime Minister welcomed the African Union at the G20 Summit yesterday to take the seat at the high table. Then, of course, with Nigeria as well, the Nigerian President was the first of the leaders to arrive here in Delhi with European Union's leadership as well. But essentially, focus also will be his luncheon meeting with the French President. This is a relationship which has seen a lot of positive momentum, including the Indian Prime Minister traveling to Paris earlier this year for the Bastille Day celebration. And France has been very supportive, not only at the United Nations Security Council backing India for a reformed UNSC, but also when it comes to India's defense needs as well. There's a pull aside which is going to happen with the Canadian Prime Minister. Now we know that the relationship has a lot of potential, but there are concerns as well, especially the Khalistani concerns as well, the extremist concerns, and this is something that will be raised by the Indian side. Now the second aspect is the bilaterals between various world leaders. New Delhi essentially in last 24 hours has emerged as the center of global diplomacy as well, with world leaders holding their various meetings. In fact, we saw that picture of the Australian and the French leaders having a hug here in Delhi, which is very interesting given the fact that after the AUKUS deal the relationship had deteriorated in some sense, and there is a recovery, and we saw that visible moment here in Delhi. We also saw selfies being taken by the world leaders, the Bangladeshi Prime Minister and the US President Joe Biden having a selfie, which is very interesting given that in last few months we have seen a lot of shrill comments coming from US and Bangladesh.
I would just want to interject here that these are live visuals again coming in from Rajghat. We can see the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz entering the Rajghat, and he clearly has that eye band on his left eye, if I may say the right eye. He's walking towards the Indian Prime Minister and he has entered the Rajghat. These are live visuals of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and there the handshake of the Indian Prime Minister and the German Chancellor. And yet again, as a ceremonial welcome, the German Chancellor has been greeted with that khadi shawl. The Indian Prime Minister is making a point to rather tell the G20 leaders about the surroundings of the Rajghat before they paid their respects to Mahatma Gandhi at the Rajghat today. Right, Bhairavi, coming to you. Now, climate change is also a topic that has been on the agenda at the G20 Summit here in New Delhi. Talk to us about the launch of Global Biofuel Alliance and how will it help the G20 countries in meeting with their decarbonization goals?
Yeah, this is part of India's push towards renewable energy, and the fact that India and the US have worked together on the biofuel, agreement is again very important. The US has also committed $1 billion to India's renewable push, and also India has committed to trebling the use of renewable energy over the course of the next decade or more. So the biofuel, agreement is also part. If you look at it in terms of what's happening with the grid that has come up with India, UAE, Middle East and the US also, which is not just a rail and port link, but will also connect electricity and also supply chains in terms of renewable push in these economies as well. So it's overall a push towards sustainable goals that India has committed itself to, and to climate mitigation. And it's bringing more and more countries on board in that promise to reach those goals that were reached at the Paris Accord, where India really had quite a say in terms of what the developing world wants from the developed world, because of course the sustainability goals for us have to be different from those of the countries like of Germany and Europe and US, because they're already at a level of climate mitigation that we have still commitments to make under climate goals.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bhairavi and Siddhant, for joining us on WION at this hour and sharing insights with us. We'll of course be tracking all the bilaterals very closely right here, and live visuals of the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni entering the Rajghat as she's having that brief chat with the Indian Prime Minister. Let's all see what else is making news at this hour. We're still on with our continuous coverage of the G20 Summit.